It's almost like you used to be in the military.
A few minutes early, huh?
Always on time
There you
or
go.
early.
I think that's some a little bit of my own form of PTSD that I have to work through still.
There you go. Hey, I think there's worse things. There's worse things.
Right, absolutely. I'll take it. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I am doing well, and I deeply appreciate the color coordination that's happening over
You
there.
like that? You might guess what my favorite color is.
Yeah. Too
I got
good.
it all going on. All
No,
right. Okay. If there's nothing else, we'll get rolling here.
we are good.
I'm already recording, so all right. So thank you for joining us in the forge today. When I set this podcast up, and for regular listeners, forging metal is about facing adversity, doing hard things, and I have now trademarked the name Forging Metal. And so really this metaphor, this analogy of going into the forge and coming out stronger, right? You go into the forge and there's heat and there's pressure and there's hammering and all of that. Our guest today is the prototypical perfect guest for Forging Metal because he's been through the fire
Mm.
and he's come out stronger. So Caleb Campbell, thank you for joining us today.
Ron, thanks for having me, and also thanks for creating the space to have these conversations.
I appreciate that. Of course, I think this is important. So it's
Mm,
always nice to hear somebody else that agrees with me there. So,
absolutely.
I got I got in touch with you from one of my previous guests, Julie Lithcott Hames.
Yes,
Wonderful, wonderful woman, wonderful person,
she's a
wonderful.
powerhouse.
Yes, interview. She got a little fired up in our interview. It was fun, but she dropped your name, and I said, "Wow, this guy sounds like somebody I want to reach out to." And that's how I kind of got on your path, and I vaguely remember, and I hope you don't hold this against me. I vaguely remember your story when you were in the NFL, but I didn't know it well until I started kind of digging into it. So let's start there, Caleb. Let's
Yeah.
talk about this idea of, I don't know, maybe 2008. That time frame when you left the West Point and went into the NFL. What happened? What was going on there?
Yeah, there's oftentimes I will say that there are two parts of that story that's happening simultaneously. On the external, what's happening is my sophomore year at the academy. If you're familiar with West Point, then you know when you graduate the academy, you have a minimum of a 5-year service obligation. You get commissioned as an officer, and you're in the military as an officer and serving in whatever capacity for at least 5 years. My sophomore year at the academy, I was number 6 rated strong safety in all of college football, and a lot of NFL scouts started coming around. Teams started to talk to West Point, to me. Agents started reaching out, and it kind of started this conversation, and this conversation was already kind of happening. There was a couple years before me a baseball player that was getting the opportunity to go pro, and so they were trying to continue this conversation with cadet athletes who have the opportunity to go pro, and what does that look like? What does that look like, especially we're a nation at the time of war, and everything's happening. So that happened my sophomore year, where they created this new policy called the Alternative Service Obligation Policy that essentially said if I was good enough to get a professional contract, I could go play in the NFL and serve simultaneously. And it was kind of loosely worded, didn't know exactly what that looked like or what that meant. But nonetheless, my senior year, I find myself at Radio City Music Hall getting drafted and selected by the Detroit Lions. And after I got selected, I graduated West Point, got commissioned as an officer. A lot of my classmates, they went off to their assigned duty stations, and I reported to training camp. And then on the day of my first NFL contract signing, literally the 24 hours before training camp was scheduled to start, in about 120 minutes before I was scheduled to sign my first NFL contract, I got a call from the Department of Defense, and also from my agent, telling me to get to the stadium immediately. I got to the stadium, I walked into the room, and anyone with the Detroit Lions, including the owner, they were all up there in that conference room. And that's when I heard the athletic director from Army, from West Point, on that phone, and kind of told me, hey, that policy that was created back when you were a sophomore at the academy, it's been rescinded. it no longer exists. You have to return back to active duty immediately, and you need to be at West Point by the start of day tomorrow. And so it was this really big whirlwind, and they kind of rewrote the policy. I didn't know at the time, but they rewrote the policy that said, after you serve for a minimum of 3 years, if you still have a professional contract, you can apply for an early release. And that word apply meant a lot of different things. There was a lot of hoops that I would have to jump through in order to get that early release and to ultimately, hopefully, fulfill this childhood dream and get back into the NFL.
Caleb, can I interject real
Please.
quick? And I'm sure you've been asked this. Do you ever think back and say, wow, what if that wouldn't happen? 120 minutes
Yeah.
before you're about ready to put pen to your childhood dream, your contract. And what if what if that wouldn't have happened? Your whole life would have been different? You ever think about that?
No, I think it saved my life.
Wow. Okay.
If I'm being
And
honest. And I think that's the other part of the story that a lot of people
okay.
don't realize, or what I speak often about now when I'm on a keynote stage or working with a leadership team is I knew that I did not have what it takes to make it in the NFL. Like, I honestly, Ron, it's kind of funny. I played better football when I was in Pee Wee than I did in the off-season program
Tell me
leading.
more. What do you mean by that?
I looked and I felt like had never played football before. So what happened is when I got to Detroit, they moved me from the one position that I knew, and that was safety. It's the position I played all through college football. And they moved me to an outside linebacker. I just didn't vibe with the position. I couldn't pick up the position, playing 12 yards off the ball versus playing 3.5, 4 yards off the ball.
You're kind of a big safety.
I was actually the biggest safety in college football when I got drafted.
All right.
It was just a really big change for me. And then on top of that, the stress and the pressure that I was dealing with, I didn't have the social emotional tools to really navigate that in a conscious way or an intentional way with a level of awareness that was needed to deal with that stress and to deal with that pressure. At that time, you either loved me or you hated me. And what I mean by that is I was receiving flags from units that, they flew this flag into this combat mission. And they, would send me the flag as kind of a good luck charm and saying like, hey, our whole unit, our whole brigade is behind you. We're rooting for you. Don't let us down. Or I would get letters, and I still have the same letter. I have a letter tucked away in my files, but it was from a parent who, and I get it. It was from a parent who had just lost their son, and they sent me a picture of his flag draped coffin. And they also sent me a picture of Pat Tillman. And they said, I thought the C that you wore on your uniform at West Point meant captain, but in your case, it means coward or cut and run. Your entire school, like your entire class is going off to fight our nation's war, and you're going to the NFL. And so I
How'd
remember
that make you feel?
it debilitated me. Again, I was the least self-aware person you've ever met in your life, Ron, at this time. I was the most emotionally reactive person you've ever met. I was driven by so much fear when we'll talk about this, but when you look at a person's nervous system, right? When you look at their autonomic nervous system, I was stuck in that parasympathetic or that sympathetic nervous system all day, every day. And I was so anxious. I was so uncontrollable, so unpredictable. I had a lot of rage in me, a lot of anger in me, and I was scared. I was just this scared little boy in a man's body trying to navigate the world with the tools that I did not have access to. And so a lot of things were happening during that time, and I just felt so much pressure from both sides. I didn't want to disappoint people. I did graduate with 972 other cadets, and they went to war. I went to the NFL. I kind of internalized this story and this pressure as like, hey, this is my battle to fight, and this is my war to win. Like, this is the way that I'm going to give back. This is the capacity in which I'm going to serve. I'm going to have a really successful, there's no ands, ifs, or buts. I've got to have a really successful NFL career so I can give back and so that I can do these guys proud. And so I just had all of this pressure and all of this stress. And then when I went out to Detroit and we had this off-season program, and I saw myself just getting the shit kicked out of me and getting my ass kicked on the football field, and I knew that I was not going to make it. I knew I was not going to make the cut. I was not going to make the team. So when they came around and told me that I couldn't play, come on, I was secretly thrilled that they told me I couldn't play, because at this time I'm telling myself, one, I get a safe face. I don't get the whole world. I get to protect my secret from the entire world. And that secret is this deep fear that I'm not enough, that I don't have what it takes. And then on the other side of it, I kind of tell myself, now I have 3 years to become bigger, to become faster, and to become stronger, so that when a time does come, and if I do happen to get that chance 3 years later, I will be prepared to make the best of it.
Wow. And so if you're following along, basically, Caleb, you were kind of yanked out, and then 3 years later, you could resume your career, and so that's what
Yes.
you're talking about with that 3 year.
Yep.
You know,
So after 3 years of serving, if I was still able to get a professional contract, I could apply for an early release and then play, and then also continue to serve in a reserve capacity.
okay. So here we are. We're feeling like we're never enough, but you're going, hey, wait a minute. I get 3 years to become enough, right? I'm sure that was
Yeah,
whether that was explicit in your mind, that's what you're thinking, right? Now I can
absolutely.
become enough. I can almost guess how that turned out, because I'm somebody that's recovering from always feeling like I'm never enough, and so I can relate. And that hole is hard to fill with what? That's something we're going to talk about, is performance. You talk about achievement equaled performance, and so you kind of hook those things together. And if you're looking for that to fill that hole in your, I don't know, in your soul, gosh, that's a big hole. You know this as well as I do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think achievement equals performance, but performance equals acceptance.
Mm,
Performance equals belonging.
somebody will
Performance
love me.
equals I will find my place in the world. My life will matter. I'll be seen. I'll be known. I'll find the significance that the deeper parts of my being craves. Like, I realized, Ron, through years of therapy, that it was never about the NFL for me. It was about reaching this perceived reality where I had no vulnerability. It was about reaching this perceived reality where I finally felt safe enough and secure enough in my life. And so it wasn't about the NFL, but it was about this idea of what the NFL represented to me. But then I started to realize that it was in the NFL that I still didn't feel safe. I still didn't feel secure. I still had all of these deep vulnerabilities that scared the shit out of me. Right. And so I realized that there was this massive disconnect happening at that point.
Hey, do you think this is another great topic, vulnerability, right? And so,
Yeah.
do you feel like, and I think I know the answer, but let me hear it in your words. Can we be strong and also be vulnerable?
I think it's the very definition
I
of
was hoping you'd
strength.
say that.
Yeah, and I think we have to like really define vulnerability, because I think in today's world we know that vulnerability is a hot topic, and we know it's necessary. We read the Brene Brown books, or we read all the research from Adam Grant around vulnerability, and then we think that vulnerability is just verbally vomiting about our weaknesses or about what's going on in our life. That's not necessarily what I mean by vulnerability. I think vulnerability is more than anything a posture of the heart. And it requires a deep level of self awareness that you can learn, right? But it's really understanding when I show up in life with all of this protective armor, when I'm hiding behind this facade of success, or when I'm hiding behind my achievements, or when I'm hiding behind my status or my accolades or my role, right? Or whatever it is that I'm using to protect myself from fully being seen, protect myself from fully being known. Like, vulnerability looks like taking the armor off. And that can look like a million different things, but that takes tremendous courage. That
Mm.
takes a tremendous amount of strength that supersedes this notion of willpower. Like this, there's a deeper story being told, right? That is more, and I'm not saying your ability to get up and try again, your perseverance, your grit, your resilience doesn't matter, but I'm saying there's something that's even giving you the opportunity to tap into an inner strength that supersedes all of those things.
What? Yeah, I mean, you mentioned going to therapy, but was there anything that was like a flip the switch where you're like, okay, I'm dropping the armor now? Was there a moment that you can point to that changed it for you?
Yeah, I think what I heard all the time in the NFL, Ron, was like, you're Captain America. You're a soldier. If there's one guy that can make this work and to make this happen, it's you. Like you're a soldier. Like you went to West Point, And so I heard all of this language around the expectations of how people saw me and what people expected of me. And again, I was so wildly afraid of being seen for who I really am and the truth about what I really was experiencing. And so I lived in the tension of showing up and trying to live up to these expectations, trying to be the strong one, trying to be the person that has what it takes, trying to be the person that, shows up 30 minutes early, stays 30 minutes late, so that I can fit the mold of the expectations that everybody had of me because I was this soldier
Hmm.
NFL athlete from West Point. And there became this tug of war in my life where it's the very definition of imposter syndrome. Like I was trying to live into the expectations of who I thought I should be and who everybody else thought I should be. But my God, I was barely holding on. Every day it took every fiber of my being and every ounce of energy that I had to barely hold this image and this facade together. And I remember I got to this point in the NFL where I couldn't keep pretending I was going to lose it all. And what I mean by that is I knew that I was living a lie and I hated myself because of it. And I'm in the middle of my childhood dream and I'm going on 48-hour benders with drugs and with alcohol trying to just cope with this pain of self-hatred because I'm showing up every day and I'm not living honestly and I'm living this lie. And although I couldn't communicate that, I felt it in every part of my body and I hated myself and I hated my life and I wanted a way out. And I was scared of walking away because I thought that meant that I was a failure. I thought that meant that I was weak. I thought that meant that I wasn't who everybody thought I was. And I was just going to be a disappointment to anybody and everybody that mattered to me. Right. So I couldn't walk away. So I was looking for my way out. And it was going to be a way that would result in my parents getting a phone call notifying them that their son is no longer with them.
Wow. All right. I figured we were going to go here, but let's go here. Let's get serious for a second
Yeah.
here, because I think this is a topic that gets, I think, brushed under the rug. I mean, people don't like to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. But here's the deal: we got to talk about this. You said that this inner battle, and you just kind of alluded to this. This inner battle almost cost you your life.
Mhm.
What do you mean? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I think it was just in a sense where I felt like I want to be more open and honest about my struggles. I just want somebody to come along and give me the permission to say I don't have to have it all together all the time. But I didn't have that permission because of the expectations and because of what people were saying to me and expecting, and really truthfully what I was expecting of myself. Like I should be a guy that has what it takes to make this happen in the NFL. I have all the tools. I have all the talent in the world. Like what the fuck is going on? And the inner struggle was just constant suppressing and denial of my truth, of really truly what's going on so that I could meet the expectations of who people think I should be, right? So that I could live into this image of who I want to be and who others want me to be. But every day it was this tug of war between trying to live into this image, but also being somebody that's just drowning in depression, drowning in panic attacks and anxiety, drowning in this measure of self hatred, just disgusted with myself because I think I should be better, I think I should be more, and every day I'm disappointing myself. And so I'm living internally with this struggle that's just happening. And again, I'm the least self aware person you've ever met at this time, so I have no language for this. It
Hmm.
is just an emotional chaos that is erupting on the inside of me every single day. And so, how do I deal with that? I don't know how to talk about it because I don't have the language for it. And so, that's when it just becomes obsessive drinking, obsessive drug use, anything just to numb the voices, to numb the pain, so that I can just, hey, survive another day, and maybe tomorrow I can figure it out.
Boy, here at 14 Mental, the way I teach mental toughness and coach on it is that mental toughness has bad days.
Yeah, come on.
And, I don't want to I feel like I'm calling people out when I say this, but I don't subscribe to the David Goggins model I love David. I love a lot of what he's doing, but he acts like, we never have bad days. And if you
Come on.
do, you're weak. Right.
Yep.
And that is such a just dangerous message.
Yeah.
So
Ronnie, we just
let's
became we just became best friends with that comment.
we've got to pause right here for all the listeners and say, hey, you can still be tough. You can be mentally tough and have bad days. That's part of being human. So let's make sure we emphasize that. And I love, coming from you. I mean, I don't know you well, but my guess is you're a pretty mentally tough guy. But hey, we had to navigate some storms here. So
Absolutely.
did this lead to, I mean, let's use the word. Did this lead to you thinking about suicide?
Oh, absolutely. Every day of my life.
Okay.
And if it wasn't like active, like committing suicide, I knew there was a night where I was sitting in the parking lot of the facility of the team I was playing for at the time, and I had been up for 48 hours on a bender, and I'm walking into practice,
Wow.
and I'm having this moment of realizing that like I'm this walking like lie. Nobody knows really what's going on. Nobody knows my habits. Nobody knows what I'm hiding, right? Nobody knows any of this. And I realized I had this moment where I'm like, Jesus, Caleb, you are actively trying to kill yourself. You're trying to blow up your life in such a dramatic way that could result you going to jail, right? Getting in massive trouble, or worse yet, dying. Like you're trying to actively kill yourself. Like something has to change. And I had enough awareness to realize that like that shortly after, you know, me getting cut for that third and final time, I had a call from my agent saying, "Hey, a team wants to bring you in for a workout." And I'm like, "No, I can't. I know that if I say yes to this, like nothing in my life is going to change." And this is like the idea of grace, and whether you believe in God or the universe, whatever, this is like the universe's way, God's way of saying, "Hey, I'm going to extend some grace for you to see that if you don't change, if something in you does not change, nothing in your life is going to change." And what Albert Einstein says, that we can't solve a problem at the same level of awareness that created the problem. And so I knew that I had to shift focus so that I could begin to shift my paradigm and change my awareness around what I'm going through in my life, so that I can begin to change my inner world. And when my inner world changes, therefore everything else is going to begin to hopefully fall into place. And so there was just that one moment where I realized I'm actively trying to kill myself. Something in me, something has to change. And I said no to that opportunity to go play in the NFL. And that's when I hung my cleats up for good. And I begin this, I'm on a 12-year journey. I often say I'm 12 years old. I'm 12 years old in terms of like learning how to take care of this, meaning my heart.
Yes, if you're not watching this on YouTube, Caleb is motioning to his heart, and yeah, I love the way you put that. I'm a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
I always like to use the terminology like I talk to my students about now you're version 2.0, or if we want to talk about software or whatever, but you take it a little different. I like that. I'm just thinking to myself. So, and I think you started to kind of open the door to this. Why do you do what you do now? What is the last 12 years? I mean, I get a sense you've got some passion for what you do now. What drives that? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it changes. I think for 10 years, it was my own sanity. I've always lived with this, Ron, like this deep ache in me. I've always lived with this intuitive knowing that there's something more, there's something deeper. And I don't mean more in terms of like this upward trajectory of a bigger and better life necessarily, but I mean more in terms of like a more rooted, a more grounded life. One of my favorite poets is Rilke, and he says, if we could just surrender to Earth's intelligence, we too could rise up like rooted trees. And I want to live a rooted tree type of life. I want to be able to be rooted, to be grounded, to be fully aligned, to be in my life, to be comfortable in my own skin, to be comfortable in my body, to feel safe and secure in my life, and to do work that matters. And so for so many years, what drove me was just deeper healing, deeper experiences of healing, deeper experiences of surrendering and letting go, so that I could begin to taste true freedom, this inner freedom that I think we all have an invitation for. I think we're constantly being extended invitations to go deeper into our own lives. But this is the great paradox, that the deepness of life that we long for doesn't come through doing more, achieving more, being better necessarily. It comes with learning how to resist less. And I realized that there was a moment in my life that getting to the next level of my life wasn't about doing more, but it was learning how to resist less, learning how to surrender, learning how to let go. And that's been the real work. And I say all of that to give you a little bit more context, that I find a lot of people are in their life, and despite working hard, despite showing up every single day, the life that they want is not the life that they have. And they're waking up and they're feeling this dread, this weight, this despair. And they've tried their hardest to work their way out of it. They tried their hardest to achieve their way out of it, to get to this next level of accolades. And they find themselves there and they realize that, damn, this ache, it's still here. Like, what is going on? My work and my passion is to create language around that experience so that you better understand your own story, and really giving you the tools to say yes to your own paradox of healing, or your own paradox of life that you're going to have to step into, so that you can expand your life, expand your leadership, expand who you are, in a way that you've never expanded before.
Yeah, boy. Same, right? I always say that my journey started with trying to find a salve for my wound,
Mm-hmm.
and I can hear that in what you're saying. And
Mm-hmm.
then once I felt like, okay, I'm getting pretty knowledgeable about this, and how can I help others with it
Yeah.
now? And so that and I like that you say, give some language around this, because
Yeah.
this is not that uncommon, to be quite honest. I was the same person. I had everything that people told me I should want, and I wasn't fulfilled,
Yeah.
and I couldn't figure out why. And so I didn't have the tools to figure out how to eject from that, and start to pursue something I loved and I was passionate about.
Absolutely.
So,
I
boy,
th-
we,
I think
we
I think for me it was like 10 years. Like, I was just trying to survive for so many of that time. Like, really just trying to survive. And I tried to start things. I tried to create things, in terms of like start this group or start this program or start this, and it was all premature. And looking back, it's so clear now that it's premature, that I was still going down and descending into my own soul, into the depths of my own inner turmoil, so that I could better understand at a deeper level my story and how it relates to other people. And truthfully, just in the last 2 years, Ron, or not even 2 years, maybe the year and a half since, my wife and I moved from Los Angeles to Nashville, Tennessee, have I begun to realize that there's been this complete energetic shift in my life. And now it's time to start really doing the work, of carrying the buckets of water that can help other people put out the fires in their own life, and really begin to learn their own tools and their own story in a new, profound way that can hopefully, and what I believe, will usher them into a deeper, more satisfying, more real, more fulfilled way
mm.
of doing life.
And I think, at the end of the day, we all deserve that, right? We all deserve to live
Absolutely.
to live that life. Um, I hear in what you're saying that, more is not always better. I mean, this
Yeah.
this makes me a little bit crazy with how society, and not to play a victim. I always say, let's not be a victim here. We have power over this, but we get bombarded with this idea of the hustle culture, right?
Yeah.
And do more and be more productive and don't waste time. And I think so many of these are just working counter to a little bit of maybe what I'm hearing from you is, how about instead of doing more, you do less, or less resistance, as you say. And that's a hard message to sell to, especially a lot of young people.
Yeah, we want to be the captain of our ships. We want to be in
Yeah.
control of our lives. And I think there does come a time where you do have to begin to learn maybe, or to begin to trust that there is something outside of your ability holding this all together, right? And that's hard when you've been the one that has built an identity around performance, around achievement, around, moving your life forward. When that's your identity, God forbid, not going or not doing, it's terrifying. It literally feels like a metaphorical death. And I think it's really nuanced. Life is not it's, for some it's about hustling really hard, for some it's not about hustling really hard. I think the better question is like, why is it so important to begin with?
Mm.
Like, truly, what's the driving force behind this? Is it fear? Like, what is the driving force? And if we can deploy the self-awareness in our life and to better understand the driving forces, the intentions behind why we do
Mm.
what we do, and those are layered. They are really, really layered. And I think we know it, because I would have told you for the last decade that the driving force behind my life is to make a difference. But that's not the case. The driving force behind my life was driven out of a fear of never being enough, or a fear of
There you
living an
go.
insignificant life. And it took me years to peel back the layers and to kind of develop the willingness to be honest with myself and to see the truth about really what's going on in my lives. And so I'm with you on the hustle culture, and it took me years to realize that it was never as much about the hustle as it was as it was about me avoiding stillness. Right?
And why avoid stillness? This is
Man,
this is fun.
avoiding stillness, like avoiding being present in
Yeah.
my life, like being present in my life, like that scared the shit out of me. You know why? Because when I got really honest and when I began to peel back the layers, I began to
There you go.
realize that shame was the driving force behind my life. And I was able to connect this. And this is the beautiful thing about therapy. Like, when I was 6 years old, I remember being in a room full of family. And I was around an uncle that had too much to drink, and he pulled my pants down, completely depants me. And I'm in a room full of people who I should feel safe around, who I should feel secure
Mm.
around, who I should feel loved and nurtured. And now in this moment, I'm literally physically exposed, and I'm met with a room full of laughter. And I was so humiliated. I pulled my pants up and I ran out that door, and I hid for about 4 hours. They had to send out people to find me because I was so deeply humiliated and wounded in this moment. It took me years of therapy to really connect the dots that when I'm fully seen in my life, when I'm fully exposed in my life, right, I'm not enough. I'm truly not enough. So this shame, this
Yeah.
pervasive shame, was the actual driving force behind my life, because let me prove to you how great I am. Let me show you
Yes.
how big I can get. Let me show you the great things that I can do. But it was never enough, because this is what shame does. Shame literally erodes our life from the inside out, and it's always going to tell us that we are never enough. And now, anytime you ask me to be still, I had to taste that shame. I had to see that shame.
Hmm.
I had to feel that shame. So I'm like, hell no. I am not touching that. Let me just continue this upward trajectory of doing more, being more, achieving more, to avoid the shame.
There you go. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? We see this hustle culture, and I would agree there might be a good reason for that. And who am I to tell anybody what's a good reason? But if the reason is achieve more, if I can hustle more, then I can achieve more. If I can achieve more, then I'll be more valuable. If I can be more valuable, then more people will love me, right? It's all about this idea of just finding some acceptance.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, when I sit still, and then I'm alone with my thoughts, and I may not like what I find in there, me included. I
Yeah.
do a lot of endurance sports where you run 50 miles, you have a lot of time to think. You go into a lot of caves, and you don't always like what you find in those caves. But this is part of how, I mean, we can ignore it, but I think you would agree that's how we get better is we need to go in there and say, okay,
Yeah.
let's look at the warts.
We need to learn how to um, create the environments that give us the permission to ask harder questions and to better understand ourselves. Like, we truly need to better understand what are the undercurrents of our life that are truly moving our lives forward. If we really want to, I guess I would use the word maximize our life experience. Like, I want to maximize my life experience. I want to find deep fulfillment, deep happiness. I want to find deep inner peace. I want to run my race. I want to be in love with my life. I do. And I think for so many of us, especially if you're a high achiever or you're a performer or like a performance centric person, we think that the way to experience that depth of life is through this upward trajectory, this do more, be more, achieve more, go, 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 go. And it has its place in our lives. It really does. But there's going to come a point where you just can't do anymore. And the faster that you can get honest with yourself around that, the better off you are. And the invitation then is to go inward, is to really better understand these undercurrents, the stories that are driving your life forward, the intentions that are really behind your motivation in life, so that you can really begin to see what's really going on and begin to apply energy and focus in that capacity. And then you're going to see your inner world begin to expand. Right. And that's going to drive deeper connection with yourself. It's going to drive and foster deeper connections with the people around you. And that relationships and those heart-centered relationships, when you open up and you're allowing yourself to be seen because you're no longer afraid of being exposed. Why? Because you've done that work. You've seen the dark parts of the heart's crevices. You've asked the hard questions. You begin to heal and process pain. You can show up in the world as more of your authentic whole self. And that has massive, massive, uh, influence over the depth and the connections and the happiness and the inner peace that you're going to begin to experience in your life. And it starts with going inward and asking those hard questions and learning the tools. Learning the tools are big, so that when you can see the things that you are afraid to see, you know exactly how to respond and you have the tools to respond.
Mm. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist. It was certainly the way I was raised, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say I feel like you might be one of those people as well. Were you Did you grow up thinking perfection is the goal?
I don't know if I ever would have said perfection is the goal. A big moment in my life was, I was a flag football hero, Ron. Fifth grade, no, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. I'm the flag football star quarterback of our community. And I remember one moment that marked my heart so profoundly. And I had scored the game winning touchdown. And I remember, and this is like the citywide community championships, like it's a big deal, And I had scored that game-winning touchdown, and I ran off of the field, and I saw my mom there waiting for me, and she had this big smile on her face, and she grabbed my sweaty red cheeks, and she looked me in the eyes, and she said, "Caleb, you scored the game-winning touchdown. I love you so much."
Oh,
And it was nothing like that my mom did wrong. Like, she was just expressing
no.
her love and adoration for me, but there was something that clicked in me, and I physically can still feel this in my body. And it just indicates the work that's still being done in my own life of like, oh, I'm finding the love and the acceptance and the belonging if I can just score touchdowns in my life. And so my life became, all about literally scoring touchdowns, but also metaphorically. And so if that is like kind of the perfectionism, then sure. But I was definitely a performance driven person my entire life, and there was no performance that was ever good enough. And I demanded more of myself and more of myself and more of myself until I just, like I said earlier, almost took my life.
Caleb, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that sounds a lot like perfectionism.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
never
Yeah,
enough.
it
It's
is. Yeah.
really, but here's and gosh, I'm so glad you said that because parents don't realize when they say that now your child says performance equals love. The way I'm going to get love from mommy and daddy is to perform well.
Mhm.
And I know it comes from a good place. I'm not a parent, so I always say, who am I to say? But there's all kinds of research to say that's not a good thing. And so that's funny though that, or maybe not so funny, but that you can go all the way back in time and
Oh yeah.
remember that moment as kind of etching that in your brain.
Oh yeah. And I think that that's the work, is realizing that until we are willing to go back, right? Until we are willing to look inward, for so many of us, myself included, Ron, there is a little boy or a little girl, a little child inside of every single one of us that is dictating our life. And a great question that somebody asked me one time in therapy years ago is, what is the one thing that you needed the most in your childhood and that you never received?
Wow.
That's your work. Your work is to go back and to learn how to grow and to reparent that inner child, Whether you had a great childhood, there are still things that you didn't
Yeah,
receive that
yeah.
you needed. Whether you had a hard childhood, right? The work is to go and to reparent the inner child so that that inner child that is the governing force, it's in the driver's seat, right? It's in the driver's seat. You know, it's like those moments when you realize that the situation at hand and your emotional reaction to the situation don't necessarily match up. And then you're like, maybe 24 hours later or maybe 15 minutes later, you're like, why the hell did I just react that way? Like, what did I just do? What did I just say? Like, are you kidding me? Right? Why that happened is because there's this really, really young person inside of you, right, that remembers all of the collective memories and the moments that you had as a child. And that little child is making those decisions and you're reacting in your adult body. And so our work is to go back and to really rewrite the stories, the narratives of those profound childhood moments that had a profound effect on our life.
Yeah, so well said. You know, the funny thing is, it's kind of cliche. Even Brene Brown talked about it. I think in her first TED talk is, you know, therapists always start with, "Let's talk about your childhood," right?
Yeah,
And there's a reason, right?
absolutely. I
There's
think one of the great books that I have back here is it was Oprah's. It's What Happened to You.
yeah.
You know, like what happened. Like that's like that's a question that we need to ask because I think in a lot of ways that question is the driving force behind so much of the empathy that we're missing in life.
Oh,
You
I
know,
100% agree.
when I,
And you know,
I think so, I can't remember. I started to cut you off. There's a quote that says, an enemy is just a person whose story we have not yet heard.
hmm hmm
And I
yeah,
think, we can see that in the lives of our interpersonal relationships and that we hate or that we are so angry or we're so mad at certain people in our lives for what they did. But when I really, and this doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries in your life, and this doesn't mean that you don't like, you know, make some hard decisions in regards of where this relationship goes. But when I realized that they did what they did because of the pain that they're carrying, man, like it just like, oh, I forgive you. That like I'm so sorry that happened to you. There are still consequences for your actions per se, but I'm not going to harbor any more bitterness or unforgiveness towards you. Right? I'm going to let that go. And subsequently, Ron, I think so many of us, like I said earlier, we're at war with our own lives and we've become our own worst enemy. Why? Because we haven't taken the time to process our own story.
so well said. I mean, just I see a lot of people walking around with a lot of agitation, and you know, it's that misalignment with who you are and trying to maybe put on that false front, like you've been talking about. That is going to just eat you up inside. And I know this because maybe at your level, Caleb, but I used to live this journey as well, where I was trying to be something. You know, kind of going back to my childhood, I always felt like I was never enough. Why? Because it was never enough for dad,
Yeah.
and loved
Come on.
my dad, but he used to say I'm a perfectionist, and you know, everything I did, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. So everything I did, he would say things like, "That's pretty good, son, but it's not going to be good enough to get you to the big leagues."
Yeah.
So that's how I grew up. So it was pretty easy for me to connect the dots back to my childhood and go, okay, that's why I'm this way as an adult. Nothing's good enough. I always was seeking perfection. I was a control freak. And again, all driven by things that were planted, I don't know, maybe in my brain when I was young. So
Absolutely.
do the work, people, do the work. And it's not easy. And let me say one more thing about empathy. The world needs more empathy.
Come on.
Let me echo what you're saying, Caleb. That more empathy. You know, everybody's all self righteous and go, "I would never do that," and "How could you do this?" And let's just understand, people are human beings, and they do have their own struggles and their own suffering.
Yeah, and we really can't have empathy for our brothers and our sisters until we learn how to have a little bit more compassion towards ourselves. When we realize that, you know what, like when I see my brokenness, and I don't mean that in a self-derogatory way, but when I see the things that have happened to me and the pain that I've been carrying, and when I've learned how to respond to it with compassion and to learn how to walk into deeper measures of self-acceptance, right? That totally revolutionizes my heart space. That totally revolutionizes my relationship with self. And when that relationship with self revolutionizes now, it just like, God damn, like I see you out there. Like I see you're hurting. I see your brokenness. I see your pain. I'm so sorry that happened. And I'm so mad at you for what you did, but it's as much as it's your fault, it's not your fault, right? And there's
Yeah.
empathy there.
I'm laughing because I feel like we're brothers from another mother. Because I always tell people, I go, I know this sounds cheesy, but I say we're all brothers and sisters.
Yeah,
We are, and I'm not. You and I are not the first ones to say that.
sure.
But when we can start to look at the people around us, even the ones we disagree with, as our, I have three sisters. I've disagreed with my three sisters a lot, right? And it's just we look at them and go, "Hey, I get it. May not agree with you, but I can connect with you as a human being." And what a wonderful message. Um, Gosh, I feel like I could, how we say this. I know I sound for my regular listeners. Ron, you always say this, but I could do this. I could do this conversation for hours. I really
Yeah,
could. Sometimes I'm going to be like, Rich Roll, and I'm going to do 2 hour
there you go.
podcasts or something.
Go for it.
But I always like to say, I like to be respectful of your time. I know you're a busy guy. Before I get to our last questions, I'm a little bit curious about your thoughts on something. I noticed earlier you said run your own race, and again, nice cliche, right? And I agree with it.
Mhm.
What I grew up, as I said, I grew up in a competitive world. Sports is very competitive, as you know, and I always felt like that my relationship with competition was way more unhealthy than it was healthy. What
Mhm.
are your thoughts on competition? And when I say competition, I mean the zero sum game, the win lose. Like if I win, Caleb, you have to lose. What are your thoughts on that form of competition? Good,
It's
bad?
Yeah, I think it's toxic. I'm not saying that I think we should like take away first place ribbons or first place, medals or trophies. But when you have self-awareness, when you're willing to go deeper than the kind of external thing in front of us, it all belongs. Nobody loses, right? Nobody loses. Like, even if you failed, even if you didn't get the promotion, even if you didn't get the job, even if you didn't finish the race, like, wow, the universe is so good. God is so good. Love is so big that it's always inviting us into and giving us an invitation to see our current experience as an opportunity to expand, as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to learn. And if you see it in that way, and I think that really is Carolyn Dweck's prime definition of a growth mindset,
Hmm.
right? That fixed mindset really is a zero sum game. The growth mindset always sees like, maybe this didn't turn out the way that I expected or the way that I hope, but what is this showing me? Like, what is it inviting me to see? Like, how can I go deeper into this experience? Is it inviting me to grow more resiliency? Is it inviting me to shift my paradigm? Maybe my beliefs around success are not healthy, right? Maybe my beliefs around this topic or this subject, need to be changed. Whatever it is, there's endless opportunities for growth, and I think our current situation is providing us that opportunity if we're willing to see. If we're willing to see.
How do you define success, Caleb, for you personally?
For me personally, is am I feeling 100% aligned in my life? Am I waking up with a inner peace and a happiness? Am I living with this deep measure of self-acceptance? Do I love who I am where I am? That's it right there. Do I love who I am where I am? If I love who I am where I am, I'm pretty damn successful.
Good. Love it. What perfectly said. And we should all define our own success
Yeah.
metrics. And it's not always about money. A lot of people like to say, and once I make X amount of money, then I'm successful.
Ron, you know what I've
And
seen though is like as I begin to do the work of loving who I am where I am, these opportunities come my way.
there you go. There you go.
Right? They really do. They come my way. There are opportunities that and things that are coming into my life that I'm like, man, I would have worked years trying to get that. And now
Oh,
it's knocking on my door. Why? Because I actually believe I'm worth it.
yes. I'm so glad you said that. I believe that positivity attracts
Yeah,
positivity, right?
it's
And,
good.
and so when you carry yourself the right way and you show up the right way, I can absolutely agree with you. Things have dropped in my lap that I'm like, wow, that would have never happened in my prior life. And so,
I love
boy,
that.
I can resonate with that. All right, I like your answer about competition too. Again, I think that competing with yourself is where we should be hanging out. We
Yeah.
should be, mastery mindset. We should be learning. And it really doesn't matter if you're top of the podium. That's great. That's icing on the cake. But
Yeah.
you know, that is not shouldn't be what we're doing. And then another topic that I don't think we have enough time to get into, but just comparison. Stop comparing
Yeah.
yourself to others. Just do your thing. Right? I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah,
If your comparison is making you feel better about yourself and maybe encouraging you, it can be healthy, but if your comparison is making you feel like shit and making you feel terrible about yourself, like it's not healthy. It's not working. Stop the
yeah.
comparison.
And the only, I would just push back and say, if even when I'm above somebody, right? I'm comparing myself to somebody and I'm doing better than
Yeah.
they are, then all of a sudden I become the pursued, right? And
Come
so
on.
I think
Yeah.
there could be toxicity both
Both
ways,
sides. Yep.
whether you're on the top of the totem pole or down below. Both of them can be spun. But I think I agree with you, and maybe this is what you're saying is, what is your relationship with that
Sure.
comparison?
Absolutely.
If it feels healthy to you, then I say go for it, right? But I think most people, comparison and competition are more toxic than helpful for most people.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree.
All right, let's. What's going on in your world? Let's start to wrap this up, Caleb. What's I know it took me almost 2 months to get you booked, so I know you're a busy guy, and I'm gonna make the assumption you're doing some great things because this is a good business. I mean, good busyness.
Yes.
And so, what's going on? Tell us about what's going on in your world, and how can people work with you?
Yeah, so I do. I'm a full-time speaker, keynote speaker, and kind of I'm either on a keynote stage somewhere or I'm working inside of, small teams, leadership teams, and the work that I do really is targeting the feeling of being so outstretched as leaders. Right, we're barely holding on. We've got a million and one things to do. We're demanding more of ourselves, and the people above us are demanding more of us. And we just are barely holding on. And so my work is really helping leaders build that internal capacity that's needed to expand their leadership capabilities and deepen their impact simultaneously while fostering healthy ecosystems where your employees and where your teams can really show up as their best selves. And so it's really a lot of emotional intelligence work with leaders. And so I get the opportunity to travel the country now for the last 4 years as a full time keynote speaker, and tell my story and really kind of develop a framework. My leadership expansion process is the framework that I bring leaders and people down that will inevitably help them expand their internal capacities so that they have the space to grow in their lives.
And what a great person to bring that knowledge to people, right? You've been through this, you've walked that walk, and I can only imagine what you bring to not only the stage, but also those that you work with.
Thank you. I appreciate
That's
that.
great. Yeah, that's great. Keep doing good work. We need more of that out there. So let's get to our last signature question.
Great.
And just to give, maybe you're a new listener, why do I ask the question of what is your greatest failure? It's not because I want to feel good about listening to Caleb tell me about his failures. It's the idea that let's normalize this. Everybody fails. We all fall down. We all skin our knee. Even people that, again, put it in air quotes, they're successful, have failed. And so I want to normalize it, and hopefully we can learn from your mistakes. So Caleb, what would be your greatest failure and what did you learn from it?
I I think there's part of me that just wants to say, failing in the NFL, that revolutionized my life. That opened up, as we have talked about, like an entire deeper, further journey that has allowed me to show up in the world in an all new way and to really truly experience everything that I've longed for, but just in a way that I've never thought. And so I would say that naturally, but I think one of my favorite failures or greatest failures was early on when I was dating my now partner, my now wife, Kara. I had just started dating her and I had drank a little too much, and this was a recurring process in my relationships. And I would get, if you're familiar with attachment styles, There's different attachment styles. I was very anxiously attached. And the goal inside of a healthy relationship is you both parties move to a secure attachment. And I had acted out in a way that was very childish, very immature. And again, I was drinking too much and I was just starting this fight for no reason. And I remember my wife the next morning looking at me, and this is just early on in dating, and she's like, "You better grow up.
Mm.
If you want this to work, you better grow up. Like, you need to go check that 6-year-old boy, like we talked about. You need to go check that 6-year-old boy, and you need to give him the love that he needs to be a man in this relationship." And what she meant by that is like being a man that can show up wholehearted, to be a man that has the emotional maturity to love and to be loved. And that was a moment, might have looked like a small failure that night, but that was such a wake-up call for me to go deeper into my own story and to go deeper into my own heart space and to begin to reparent that little boy inside of me that was so scared of being seen and so scared of being loved. And so when he got to this point in a relationship, he would push this person away. He would create a fight, he would create a story, and he would push this person away as a form of self-protection, as a form of allowing himself to be seen, allowing himself to be loved. And I did some hard work there. I did some really hard work, and marrying my wife and doing life with my wife was single-handedly the greatest experience and the deepest joy I could have ever imagined. And so I would say that's probably one of my greatest failures, because it's led to an experience of love and an experience of life that I never thought was possible.
Wow, we end right there. That's we end on your words. That's great. What a good message. Maybe there's some men out there that will take that advice to heart. I'm
Thank
sure
you,
there's a
Ron.
lot of women saying, I'm gonna have my boyfriend listen to this."
Thank you, Ron.